A very warm welcome here from Berlin. My name is David Deißner. I'm the Executive Director of Atlantik-Brücke, and I would like to welcome you to our next session, which is entitled The Next Germany on the World Stage. So in the first two sessions, of course, we have focused more on interpreting, analyzing the election results, and now we'd like to widen the perspective a little bit. And it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome two really renowned and outstanding journalists who will be joining me here on the panel. First of all, we have Anna Sauerbrey. Anna Sauerbrey is an editor and writer at the German daily newspaper Der Tagesspiegel since 2011. She also writes a monthly column on Germany for the op-ed pages of the New York Times. Anna, very good to have you here today on the digital panel.
Thank you.
And also with us is Stephen Erlanger. Stephen Erlanger is the chief diplomatic correspondent in Europe for the New York Times, a position he assumed in 2017, and he is based in Brussels. Stephen, very good to have you as well on the panel.
Thank you.
Now, let's start off with a more general question. You were both following what is happening in Germany from different vantage points for a German and a big US newspaper. What do you make of the results? Anna, let's start with you. Is there anything that surprised you in particular?
No, I think, and I think you've discussed it before, it wasn't really surprising. As we've had pretty accurate polls ahead of this election. But at the same time, I do think it's a new beginning and it's an entirely new situation for Germany. We have now, for the first time in Germany, the situation that two of the smaller parties are going first to start coalition talks, not coalition talks, but start talking about who could form the next government. And they will probably make the terms and offer a government to one of the larger parties, probably the Social Democrats. And this is pretty new, and we'll see how our political culture can deal with that.
Stephen, your thoughts on this pretty complicated result of these German Bundestagswahl? What's your...
Well, I have to say I'm very impressed by the polls, because with so many parties to get it so accurate really is remarkable. I'm struck by fragmentation. It's happening all over Europe, but the Volkspartei, it's vorbei, it's gone, it's finished. You know, to have a chancellor of either kind with a quarter of the vote is a weak chancellor. And to have a three-party coalition is, you know, it's about compromise. Now, compromise is a good thing, but it's not always a good thing after 16 years of a sort of stagnation, in my view. But I'm also pleased to see that the extremes have suffered a bit. Die Linke may or may not make parliament. The AfD has gone down from 12.6 to whatever it is, 11. But I'm still very struck by the East-West divide. And I'm hoping, just personally, having lived in Germany myself, and having first visited Germany to the Hauptstadt der DDR, that there will be some thought given to the East in this new government.
Thank you, Stephen. Now let's look at foreign policy. Foreign policy issues have not really played a major role during this election campaign. And I do remember that Germans have often criticized that a substantial renewal of transatlantic relationship, of transatlantic negotiations on various foreign policy issues was so difficult after the Trump years, as the Americans were so much inward looking. Wouldn't it be fair to say the same applies to Germany, Anna?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this campaign, and I think we've stressed that too, has been completely void of any foreign policy issues. Of course, the departure from Afghanistan came in the middle of the German campaign and was discussed a bit, and also the question of where to deploy the German Bundeswehr in the next years, whether to deploy it at all, and to with what means, and to what goals and ends. But that was just a brief interlude in a campaign that was pretty much focused on social issues, on climate change, on interior issues. So Germany is pretty much looking at itself, and but I don't think the next government will be able to do that. So I hope that we will see some foreign policy initiatives with whatever government we will have.
Thank you, Anna. Stephen, Angela Merkel has, always been not only, highly appreciated because of her, ability to mediate, to moderate. And in fact, she has been a great manager of many crises, and it was her unique quality as a leader, to mediate. But this kind of incrementalist balancing approach might have come to its limit, some people argue. And maybe for Germany, a more forward-leaning approach might be necessary, given the conflicts we are facing at the moment. Would you agree?
I would agree, except I don't expect it. I mean, I'd like to be wrong. I was struck, much as Anna was, by the lack of foreign policy discussion, but of course, I don't know of a democracy that actually debates foreign policy during election campaigns. Certainly America doesn't. It's important, but I do think, however, Europe waits and Europe is anxious because it's not just her personality, of course, it's the weight of Germany. And that's why I was disappointed not to have at least a more thorough discussion of Europe and the responsibility toward Europe in the campaign. Instead, you get all this rhetoric about, oh, we're for a stronger Europe, but what does that mean? I mean, what does that mean in terms of defense spending? What does it mean in terms of collective debt, perhaps to help pay for climate change? What does it mean in terms of inequality, of sort of regional problems? What does it mean for rule of law? Germany just matters for all of these things. And Germany, and of course Merkel too, has been this balancing wheel between East and West, and between the South and the North. Somebody has to do that. I think, either chancellor candidate could do it, but as the sort of new boy, it would lack a certain kind of credibility. And also as a chancellor with not a huge mandate, frankly, even at home, there would be skepticism. And then you have, of course, Emmanuel Macron, who has his own very clear ambitions. The French run the presidency of the EU from the 1st of January. But the window between that, the formation of a new German government, whenever that is, and the French presidential election, which is in April is very narrow. So I think people have to be kind of very patient and not have huge expectations.
Stephen, you actually wrote in an op-ed not a very long time ago that also maybe the kind of power system within Europe will change, because as you emphasized, Angela Merkel has not only been a mediator, she has also been a very dominant figure in Europe. And you wrote, and I quote, "It is the moment French President Emmanuel Macron has been waiting for." What has he been waiting for? And will he, would you argue, become more powerful, more influential? Will he really have a more formative influence of how Europe will look like in the future?
He certainly wants to have that. I mean, he's the one with the ideas, and a lot of them are very good ideas, frankly. I mean, he wants more integrated Europe. He wants a Europe that's better able to defend its own interests, to stand up for itself, to be more resilient. All that sounds fine. And of course, if he's reelected and if his party does well in June legislative elections, then it'll be easier for him. Certainly he knows he needs Germany on his side. That's clear. And my guess is he would prefer Olaf Scholz, but who actually knows for sure? Because Scholz at least seems to have with Macron an idea of fiscal integration that needs to be better if Littner will let him do it. So it's all to play for. I mean, I'm very curious to see what Draghi does. But it is a collective. It's 27 countries now. And you win, in a sense, by making allies. Macron's been very bad at making allies. So the first thing he's going to have to do is make an ally of the new chancellor, whoever that is.
Anna, would you like to add on that? Or?
Yes, I think it depends on the coalition, but if we have a traffic light coalition, I'd be pretty optimistic that we may see some progress in Europe, because especially on, I think you're right, Stephen, to stress that financial integration in the European Union, we would have a bloc of Social Democrats and Greens who are really in favor of more financial integration. And I went to a press conference this morning with Olaf Scholz. He was asked about it, about the recovery fund. And he said, well, we can do this in a way, I'm not quoting him, I'm just conveying what he said. We can do it in a way that we have already done it in a way with a recovery fund that protects Germany's interests and at the same time gives us some more space in Europe to act as a community on the financial markets. And I think he will go forward with that. And I think the Greens will be on his side. And maybe I see some possibility to convey that to the Liberal Party as a good idea. And I think they will be more forward when it comes to Europe than Angela Merkel does, because she had to deal with a lot of skepticism within her own party when it comes to financial integration. She took the chance when it was offered to her in May last year at the height of the corona pandemic, with Europe threatening to fall apart. And many southern countries, Germany was indebted to from a moral point of view at that point, because we hadn't delivered medical gear to Italy at the point when it was needed there. So she took that chance and she did it. But I think that we would see a more structured and ambitious way with Annalena Baerbock as a possible foreign minister and Olaf Scholz in the chancellery.
Well, let's talk about some of the, obviously more difficult foreign policy issues that we are looking at these days. And this is, of course, first and foremost, Afghanistan. The rapid unraveling, Afghan's rapid unraveling has really, raised doubts about America's role in the world, about America's credibility as well, particularly after the, Trump years and America's promise to be back and also backing its allies. But we also see now that backing American allies, is not unlimited, and that, many Europeans and many Germans in particular have been taken by surprise of how, quickly the US decided to withdraw from Afghanistan. Do you think that this has done harm in the long run, really, to the transatlantic partnership? How bad is it? How damaged is our transatlantic partnership, of which we had hoped that it would be revived with the new administration? Stephen?
You phrase all that very gently, I have to say. There has been, obviously, a degree of shock, a sense that America would choose one ally over another ally, for instance, in the case of Australia and France. Afghanistan, I think, will fade. I think there's been emotional outrage and perhaps shock, but it's a little bit hypocritical, to be frank, because there was a lot of consultation with NATO allies. The allies didn't necessarily like what the conclusion was, but they certainly had a chance to talk. And I've reported this out through all NATO ambassadors. There was very little opposition to what Biden wanted to do, not in April, not when he was there at the NATO summit in June. Everybody knew Biden was going to pull out. Now, the fact is they screwed up the evacuation. I think the Pentagon really took advantage of the White House, but this is a complicated thing to try to describe. But I think it's American competence that took a hit. America's commitment to NATO is not harmed, I don't believe, at all. And I was very struck that most Europeans who were in Afghanistan, frankly, had been willing to get out years ago. I mean, it was clearly an American decision. They went in to help America. And once America decided to leave, why would they stay? They didn't have any national interests there. And there were interests in helping the society and helping women and so on. And this is the tragedy. This is the emotional damage. It's the embarrassment European politicians feel about Afghanistan. They're embarrassed. I don't think their sense of American credibility is really been cut away, particularly by Afghanistan. There may be a little bit more this understanding, which many in Europe had anyway, which Macron has argued for some time, which is structurally America's changed, it's less European, it's more diverse, it has more minorities. This started under Obama, it even started with the Iraq War, to be honest. And, you know, Biden is kind of still an American national interest first, but he's Europe's friend. And frankly, I say to my European colleagues and friends, be careful what you wish for. You may get exactly what you dread, which is a second Trump term. So think about who your real friends are.
Thank you, Stephen. So let's now look at the election result again and the potential future German government and what this government's take will be on transatlantic relations and our relations with the United States in particular. And I'm also including here some questions from our audience, and I quote, it looks highly likely that the Greens will be in the next government, of course. They have had a more outspoken position on China and on Russia. How do you think their involvement in the next coalition will impact policy towards these two countries? Any thoughts on that, Anna?
It's hard to say yet. I do think that particularly with regard to Russia, we will see a more forward and outspoken policy if the Greens join the government. It's one of their core issues is human rights. So it is with the Liberals, who stress that very much in their party platform. On the other hand, the means are limited even for the next government. When it comes to questions like Nord Stream 2, the Greens have been very outspoken not to start the project or even pose a moratorium or even not ever let it be in function at all. I don't think that would go with the Chancellor Olaf Scholz. He said just this morning that, well, now it's built and we do stick with the guarantees we have given to Ukraine. But he did not elaborate what he wanted to do with it, but I took it as now it's built and now we're going to run it. At the same time, standing with Ukraine on the guarantees. And I think that could be a line. On China, Annalena Baerbock was asked about it in a programmatic foreign policy interview in April she gave to the FAZ, which I can just recommend for anybody who speaks German, because it's really, it goes down the list of issues, and she really says something about everything. And but you can also see that she doesn't really have a recipe to offer. I think she would certainly be different in meetings with Chinese government officials. The human rights issues would be tabled maybe in a more open, ambitious way. But at the same time, and I think I've just heard the last minutes of the panel with Sigmar Gabriel, and I think he's right in saying that, well, we can't turn back the great dependency of Germany's economy on the Chinese market within a 4-year legislature. So they will have the same issues to deal with. And they will maybe do that in a different tone, but with the same limited means. So I don't expect like a reversal of the policies.
Stephen, what's your view on this issue? Germany finds itself in this dilemma, obviously being economically dependent with our exports to China, particularly goods, car industry, whereas at the same time, of course, we also want to stick to our values and the Western values of democracy and the freedom of speech and so forth. So that really has, confronted Germans with that dilemma in also the transatlantic partnership. Where are we headed, and what's the room to maneuver the new government?
Well, that's true. I mean, I think China is the issue more than Russia. I'm a little less worried about Russia, right? I mean, Nord Stream 2, okay, fine. If there's no market for it, it won't work. I mean, it's very simple to me. And Ukraine's been promised that. China, my view is Germany I think Anna would agree, I hope, has been shifting anyway. It has a harder look at China. I mean, Xi Jinping's China today is not the Xi Jinping China of 5 years ago or 6 years ago. It's certainly not the China Merkel first visited 15 years ago. And it's much more aggressive, much more clear about its ambitions, and it presents a much bigger threat to Germany and to Germany's industries, to the Mittelstand. It's eating Germany's lunch, and Germany's very bad, seems to me. This may sound ugly, but where's the German computer? Germany's very slow on electric cars. I mean, Germany has to move into the future, and China, in a way, holds it back, it seems to me. And the BDI has been much more aggressive than the government, it seems to me, also in understanding that China is a market, but it's also a threat. And it's a threat for the future, and it's not a partner that reciprocates love, put it that way. So I think it's toughening. I do think Gabriel and Anna's right, it'll take some years, but I think German industry understands the change is required. The biggest problem is auto stuff. Now, how much Laschet is going to help with the auto industry, I have no idea, but I do think it is much more conscious. And of course, there are human rights issues, all that, there's Xinjiang, blah, blah, blah. But the biggest problem is German foreign policy in general is led by its market export model. And as one changes, the other has to change, it seems to me.
Yes. I mean, if I may add, I think that some of the climate policies that the Greens are supposing and the Social Democrats have, let me put it like that, decided to support, will bring greater independency for Germany's energy markets. We're now at 46% renewables, and it will have to grow at a rapid pace. And all three parties that could participate in traffic light government have promised to speed up planning times for windmills, speed up and support the industry to become gas independent or more independent of gas that's obviously coming from Russia still in a great part. So I think that would maybe give Germany more independence from the markets. We see energy prices rising right now in Europe, and I think that's going to be a big issue this fall. It hasn't really been a big issue in the past weeks because we've been so busy discussing coalition options and looking at the election. But I think it will dawn on people when they look at their bills in the fall and when they will have to start turning the heater on in Berlin. I think then energy independence will be a big issue that this coalition will have to work on.
Yes, and how to do that by weaning Germany from coal, which is really a problem. That's part of the hypocrisy about climate in Germany, I have to say.
Would you be optimistic that on the climate agenda we will see kind of substantial progress, really, or would only be lip service? I mean, there are ambitious climate goals in the Biden administration. Of course, this has been a major factor, really, also in the German election campaign, not only for the Greens. What's your view on the future transatlantic dialogue on climate? Will we see progress?
I would say it has to come. I mean, by law, the EU has mandated this sharp reduction by 2035. I think we all underestimate, at least us non-technical people, how expensive it's going to be and how difficult it's going to be and how politically unpopular it's going to be. So maybe they won't make the targets precisely, but I do think it's headed in the right direction. John Kerry certainly cares. But the problem is, as ever, having a policy toward China that may not want rivalry and cooperation. Maybe it doesn't want cooperation. Maybe it only wants rivalry. And maybe the price for cooperation will be considered too high. This is partly out of our hands, but I think this is one of those delicate things we elect smart politicians to help us through.
Thank you. Anna, we have a lot of questions actually from the audience, and many of our viewers would like to know more about the kind of transatlantic orientation of the different parties and also the implications, you know, of various coalition constellations that we might see. So could you elaborate maybe a little bit more on, you know, where we would see the greatest overlap in terms of programming orientation, maybe with what is important at the moment for the Biden administration? So from that angle, which of the parties is the most transatlantic, or the, you know, the fittest for joining dialogue with the Americans? And you know, traditionally, I would add, it was argued that maybe in the political left in Germany, they might be more critical of the United States, whereas in the conservative camp that have traditionally been the transatlanticists. Has that changed at all? What is your take maybe on the Greens, the Liberals, the Conservatives, and the SPD?
I think it greatly depends on the policy field we look at. I think with the German left, anything that's geopolitics, that's military cooperation, 2% goal, will be difficult. We have strong opposition within the Social Democratic Party and the Greens to the 2% goal. In a traffic light coalition, the Liberals will be the only one strongly supporting that. In any government headed by Armin Laschet, which I don't think is very probable looking at how the day is evolving here. But that will be the most classic transatlantic government, I think, continuing along the lines of Angela Merkel. Armin Laschet has made it clear that when it comes to foreign policy, he very much sees himself in Angela Merkel's tradition. And the conservatives, of course, have been a strong proponent of NATO and upgrading Germany's military, meeting the 2% goal. They haven't, and they have, alongside the Social Democrats, worked to raise Germany's defense budget in the past 4 years. I think with the left government, we could see new projects that could maybe, well, sort of be a pacifier for anger and disappointment in the geopolitical military field. Annalena Baerbock has suggested forming an alliance for climate neutrality, and I could see her meeting John Kerry on that, as Stephen said. And Olaf Scholz has very strongly worked with Janet Yellen and the Biden administration to pass the global minimum tax within the G7 and the G20. And I think I see a strong field of cooperation there, of fairer taxes for big companies, not just, and also maybe in the realm of a common digital legislation.
That might also be an opportunity, right, Stephen, to get out of these kind of, you know, worn-off kind of conflicts, talking about for months and months. Do you see potential here for?
Well, I do, and those arguments get tedious. I must say, I have strategic autonomy fatigue myself. You know? But I do think one of the things that's interesting, perhaps for Germany, I think NATO, particularly the Americans under Biden, is, and there'll be a new NATO Secretary General, which would be interesting, could be Parly, could be a woman, we'll see. But I think it would be more interested in developing a broader idea of what 2% involves than it does now, that may appeal more to a center-left German government, because it could include intelligence, it could include anti-terrorism stuff, it could also include climate stuff, right? I mean, there are lots of ways of measuring 2%, and I think NATO is being pushed to kind of loosen up on that. I mean, I think generally, you know, Washington and Berlin do fairly see eye to eye on things. Germany doesn't want the US to go home. It doesn't want NATO to disappear. I mean, this is part of the core DNA of Germany as much as Brussels is. And I don't think it's going to let that happen. Also, I think people in Germany understand that a real European defense initiative would take a lot of integration, would take probably treaty change, and would take military spending of 4 to 5% of GDP. I don't think people want to do that. So I'm pretty calm about all this, I have to say. I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot of emotion, but I think in this weird world we have where, you know, Russia is wants to divide us, China wants to divide us, you know, demographically, economically, as the West, we're simply less powerful than we used to be, which Merkel kept talking about. It really is incumbent upon us to kind of figure it out and stop eating each other alive and think together, like on tech and trade, of what our real problems are.
Anna, but there are still some people in the Social Democratic Party, but also in the Green Party, who are very critical of US presence and in particular nuclear weapons being based in or stationed in Europe. And they would prefer these weapons to be removed. Others would argue, well, this is really at the core of our Western security architecture, and it would be just naive to assume that Europe could defend itself, or that there is any good argument for kind of kicking the Americans out of Europe in terms of military presence and in particular nuclear weapons. What is your take on that? How will these parties manage to reconcile these internal tensions?
I seriously don't know, because it's a sleeping issue, but it could come back anytime. And Olaf Scholz certainly will try to keep it down as long as he can, because there's still very strong opposition in his party. And some of the people, for example, Rolf Mützenich, who's been the leader of the Social Democratic Caucus in this past legislature, and will certainly play a bigger role in the coming years if we have Scholz as a chancellor, because he has to give some pulse to the left, and Mützenich would certainly be one of them. And he's been very outspoken of removing American nuclear weapons from Germany. The same is true for Annalena Baerbock. That's as much as the party has moved away from being a pacifist party to a party that has supported every single deployment of the Bundeswehr in the past years. It has always voted for the Afghanistan mandates, for example, for the Kosovo mandates, etc. But in this point, there's still sort of a nostalgia for the Greens of the 80s, and Annalena Baerbock has said that she would make it an issue. She wants to address it within the context of NATO-Russian nuclear proliferation talks, but yeah, maybe it's naive to think that Russia would agree to remove some of its weapons in return for American weapons being removed from Germany. So, but that's definitely a stumbling block.
Stephen, would you think that this might be a matter of concern, maybe for the U.S. administration, looking now closely at what is happening in Germany, that kind of these currents within the parties might also mean a shift in foreign policy priorities, in particular in defense?
Yes, I very much agree with that. I mean, there are Americans who actually are in the weeds of what the whole nuclear sharing issue is, and they realize how neuralgic it is in Germany. At the same time, militarily, technically, it's probably not necessary to have these nuclear bombs sitting in Germany to be supposedly carried on German bombers that might get shot down very easily, right? So, you know, given sub-based missiles, given air-launched cruise missiles, it's not militarily crucial, it seems to me, that these sit in Germany, but there's a political aspect, and there's a tie to the alliance aspect, and there's doing our part against the Russian threat aspect. And this is something in a way that NATO cares about and Germans need to resolve for themselves. But nobody really thinks these are the most practical weapons. At the same time, I think it'd be good if people would realize how vulnerable they actually are to Kaliningrad-based Russian missiles, which are dual use, which could take out Berlin in 15 minutes, right? I mean, so there's an issue here of deterrence, which needs to be modernized. But politically, it's, I agree, a very, very difficult discussion to have.
Mm-hmm. Sorry for meandering a little bit between topics, but I would like to give our audience again a chance to ask a question here again on China. We have just talked a lot about China, but another question here on the China issue, and I quote, this is more coming from the German perspective, so I think it's quite interesting. Why do Americans seem to believe that geopolitical rivalry with China will inevitably lead to confrontation? In Germany, we are concerned about Xi Jinping's authoritarian government and about his desire for regional dominance and interference operations in Europe, but we see the need and the potential for cooperation on issues like trade and climate change. Who has the right perspective? Our viewer asks. Any thoughts on that, Anna or Stephen?
Well, I would just say, I don't think the Biden people want confrontation with China. That's not the American goal. The American goal is not to stop China's rise, it's to deter China from doing anything stupid and from attacking our allies and being nasty to the Australians and taking over Taiwan and blocking sea lanes. It's about deterrence. It's about looking at the new Chinese threat, which now has more naval ships than any navy on Earth, which is developing very sophisticated, untreaty managed intermediate range nuclear missiles and ship killing missiles. It's China's ambitions that worry people, not any desire to confront it. And cooperation would be, I think, everyone's favorite option. So I just think in the question, there's an assumption which I just don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I would agree. And I don't think Germany has the means to choose either path. I think they will have to, well, using your word, do some meandering too in this respect. The Greens will certainly try to get China to do more on climate change, again, with very few pressure to build. But with the dependency of Germany's economy, I hardly see any harsh confrontation. I think what we will see is along the lines we've seen with this government recently, some more symbolic moves like sending a ship to the Indo-China region. I think that they may continue on that path, and I think that's what the Liberals would support too. And we would see that with the Chancellor Armin Laschet too, I think. But it would be rather symbolic. It's, well, yeah, just embracing the partners in the region, and first of all, embracing America's interests.
Can I also add that don't underestimate China's own self-interest in controlling climate change. I mean, China has this huge population. It's done more on electric cars than most countries. It's done more on solar panels. It's still building coal plants. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't want to die either.
Thank you so much. You know, before we close this session, I would like to ask both of you, maybe with just one brief sentence, to tell us why we can be hopeful with regard to the transatlantic partnership with a new government. What gives you hope, Anna?
Well, I think, as I said before, what gives me hope is that I see new projects on the way in realms of climate change and global taxation.
Stephen?
Well, I would say that both chancellor candidates have made their own commitment to the transatlantic relationship explicit and strong. And I have no reason to doubt that commitment. There's nothing wrong with making Europe stronger. It doesn't mean you're harming the transatlantic relationship. In fact, I agree with Macron, it may actually make it better.
Thank you so much, Anna Sauerbrey and Stephen Erlanger, for sharing your perspectives, your very thoughtful remarks and your analyses. That was very helpful for today's digital panel here on the German election results. Many thanks also to our audience and the many very thoughtful and clever questions. Thank you so much for sharing that. And of course, to all our viewers who participated in that event. And of course, also to the partners of this event, the German Marshall Fund and the American Council on Germany. Thank you so much and goodbye. Have a good day.
Happy to. Bye-bye.
Ciao.